Holy shit, folks. I didn't see you there. You scared me half to death. Look, today we're going to be talking about something pretty serious. We got Mike from Turn Leftist back. How you doing, Mike?
How's it going, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always good to have you. We got each other in times like these. I just want to be somebody to hold me and tell me it's going to be all right, Mike. So we're going to be talking about Henry Ford. Everybody knows Henry Ford. He was a capitalist, right? He was a nut job, anti-Semitic, fascist, old-timey Elon Musk, if you will, right?
Yeah, he's like the Ur-capitalist. It's like him and like, who's the Taylor guy who invented Taylorism? It's like trying to, what do you call it? I guess, I don't want to say like, what's the word for making something more efficient? Just streamlining assembly lines. To the point where he was just like mechanizing human beings themselves, like breaking it down to like the smallest possible process so that you could get a person to perform the most incremental task that they don't have to actually think about. And then Henry Ford took the same process, but then also incorporated a bunch of union busting and just fascism into his practice. So it just made it that much worse.
Yeah. And so we're going to read a little bit about what he did. First of all, he had a newspaper that he ran, which was fascist to say the least. And he also had a program that seeked to intervene and control and manipulate the lives of his workers. And so we're going to go into two of those things today, maybe break it up into two videos, but this is for all you hardcore history buffs out there. You ready to go? Let's roll. This was brought to me by Mike. Mike's cranking out amazing essays. Check him out on Substack.
No, this is again written by Comrade Whiskey Chicken. Credit to them again. I had them write two essays about a year ago.
So you're subcontracting your work out to others.
Hey, if people want to know where any of the patron funds for my podcast have gone, any of the money you spent on t-shirts, I haven't taken a cent. It's all gone to pay people to either do sound editing or write essays like these. So just know that it's all been communist shit. We're not capitalists here.
Mike's got a whole basement of people in a sweatshop writing articles for him.
They're the people's workers.
I don't want to hear any about strikes either. I'm going to bust them up.
No color revolutions.
Yeah, please. So here's the deal, folks. The 1920s was hardly a decade of glamorous flappers and jazz hounds that popular culture makes it out to be. While these elements of the 1920s culture were prominent, especially in large American cities, there was far more depth to the decade. A lot going on. Following World War I, a wave of reactionary ideology spread around most of the Western world, from Italy to Germany to the United States. This far-right ideology gained traction and fueled in each country by a different set of material conditions. You know, you had eugenics also become popular at the same time of these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and a lot of wild stuff coming out of the 20s. And good music.
These are literally the good old days that the far-right reactionaries want to go back to. Like when misogyny and just the homophobia, not to mention transphobia, was just like totally acceptable, totally fine. Racism was totally fine. And just in popular culture, it's like, that's what people say when they want to go back to the good old days, when they can think of the typical white nuclear family prospering in the suburbs. That's built on a bunch of exploitation of colored people that they don't want to talk about.
Right. As long as the black people live over there and everybody can smoke and nobody's telling me what, to be healthy.
And I got a bunch of free labor for my wife at home to maintain the household. Yeah, we're all good. Like,
yeah, and if she speaks up, I'm going to send her to a mental institution to have a lobotomy. What a cheerful world we live in.
It's so bad, man.
During this time in the period lauded the American businessman, Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company, he purchased the Dearborn Independent newspaper and used his business empire to disseminate the paper across the United States. Now, under the ownership of Henry Ford, the Dearborn Independent capitalized on the social tensions of the decade as a means of spreading Ford's far-right political viewpoints. Now, between 1919 and 1927, the Dearborn Independent served as a major fascist propaganda outlet within the United States. During the 1920s, the ideology of fascism was still in its early years. The fascist movement, headed by Benito Mussolini, often considered the father of fascism, had only taken form in 1919, with Mussolini becoming prime minister of Italy in 1922. The emergence of fascism in Italy is quite well known, as the Nazi party's rise to prominence in the 1920s, Germany. However, this rapid growth of the ideology was not limited to just Europe. Within the United States, the 1920s were a decade defined by part in forms of radicalism and reaction to a new era of modernity that swept across the nation, and within the context of fascism found fertile ground to plant its roots. Now, of course, you also have, so much going on, but the modernity and also the incredible fast unregulated wealth from the stock market was also fueling a lot of this. And then also the Russian Revolution of 1917 put the scare into capitalists in America. And so this kind of spurred the first Red Scare, which was like, oh, these people with their communism over there, they're actually doing good. And they say they got this utopian society. And for the most part, they got to work right away and did some amazing things. So I can imagine that this scared the hell out of people like Henry Ford.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like just pointing out how much of an era of literal acceleration this was for industry and for culture. Because this was like, there was another Red Scare going on here, and it may not even been the first one. Like I want to say the first Red Scare in the U.S. was in like 1905, when the Bolsheviks had like started to kick up a revolution that failed around then, because they didn't really succeed until obviously 1917. So the U.S. has gone through so many Red Scares that we're not actually numbering them accurately. Like that's how prevalent it is. But I only say that to say that like when things accelerate, when industrialization accelerates, it increases the proletarianization of people. It makes them more immiserated because it kicks people out of their jobs. It pushes people into factories or into different environments than they were used to. It pushes people out of pastoralism. So it alienates them from things that were like classical lifestyles for them. And so when people react to that, especially in a country that is built on genocide, land theft, and crimes against marginalized and indigenous, people of color, they gravitate towards fascism, especially since the Klan already existed to sort of funnel them into it. It's like, especially when people in the U.S. are building up the American identity in opposition to communism, like the scary Russians or whatever. It's like there's so many things converging all at once to make the U.S. continue to go in this direction, not only politically, but culturally in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Excellent point. So, although the most well-known American fascist movements took shape in the 1930s, they were not created out of whole cloth. Numerous fascist figures and publications were present throughout the 1920s, although they were not necessarily viewed as such. This is due in large part to the fact that fascism in its infancy was not well developed or understood as it is today. Using a modern understanding of fascism, it is now possible to revisit the American media published, broadcasted, or printed during the 1920s and identify its fascistic trends. So that's really interesting too. That the culture starts emerging, but we can't really pinpoint what it is, if it's good, if it's bad. Eugenics also started as this thing that was like, it seems smart, you've pick the best and breed only the best and stuff. But then we all know where that led, given its impressive circulation and ownership and the often idolized Henry Ford, much like the Elon Musk of today, the Dearborn Independent is undoubtedly worthy of a re-examination. Ur-Fascism, an essay published in 1995 by Italian historian Umberto Eco, provides a perfect basis for exploring fascism in Ford's independent. Eco, who was born in Italy under fascist rule, outlined 14 key characteristics of fascism. By examining the contents of the Dearborn Independent through its lens of Eco's Ur-Fascism, the fascistic nature of the newspaper becomes clear. Although not every aspect of Eco's 14-point list was present in the pages of the Independent, the large majority were seen by the time the publication was shuttered in 1927. So you got this Italian cat. He says, I've got a 14-point identifying, trick, quick way to identify fascism. And apparently Henry Ford's newspaper checks a lot of the boxes.
Yeah, just a real quick side point. Like Echo's points on fascism, I noticed they were a lot more I'm sure they still are popular among liberals who are fear-mongering and proclaiming about Project 2025 and Trump right now. But I've noticed that they've fallen away in leftist discourse in the last few years because no one really feels the need to point out all the characteristics of fascism present in like MAGA or the Republican Party or even the Democratic Party at this point. It's like, it's so apparent to leftists and communists that like, it's barely even a conversation among this point or at this point to say that both the parties and especially just like anyone who considers themselves like an American patriot or like a libertarian in this day and age. It's like old hat now to say that they fit the criteria, or at least most of the qualities of the 14 points of fascism.
Yeah. And for some reason it's glorified and romanticized today, like as if they separate themselves from actual Nazis from Nazi times and see themselves as more different or more questioning authority and more, that they're the rebels themselves. And this is another bizarre sort of twist on the whole modern fascist thing. One of the first characteristics of fascism identified by Eco in Ur-Fascism is a rejection of modernism, which is unsurprising given the time period it emerged in. Wow, this is cool. Within the United States, the 1920s was a decade of modernism as great social changes took place across the country in the realms of race, femininity, and overall culture. Yep, absolutely. Along with these cultural shifts came major advances in technology, which helped grow the fortunes of men like Henry Ford, who built businesses around new consumer goods. Now, many people in the present day would be quick to assume that the technological advancements and cultural modernism were inherently intertwined, and thus it would be contradictory for a man like Henry Ford, who profited off all these new technologies, to be, quote, anti-modernist. However, this is not the case. Eco, in his dissection of fascist ideology, directly addressed how praise for modern technology and rejection of cultural modernism coexisted quite readily when he wrote the following. Both fascists and Nazis worshipped technology, while traditionalist thinkers usually reject it as a negation of traditional spiritual values. Heavy. However, even though Nazism was proud of its industrial achievements, it praised of modernism was only the surface of an ideology based upon the blood and the earth. The rejection of the modern world as disguised as a rebuttal of the capitalistic way of life, the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, is seen in the beginning of modern depravity. In this sense, Ur-Fascism can be defined as irrationalism. That's, this is fascinating.
Who does this remind you of? Can you think of anybody today who is like wealthy, who is very influential, and who praises technology, but then also has these weird obsessions with traditional values and weird conservative social things, like all these hangups?
It reminds me of like a guy who's got a trans daughter and is scared of trans people. Like the transgenders freak him out, but he's putting microchips in people's brains. So transhumanism, okay, but transgenderism, no way. Like,
right.
A man ridden with hypocrisy, a man who says underpopulation is the biggest problem, so I'm going to have sex with his man. I have 12 children.
Chris, do you know how stupid I feel for never making that connection until now, till you just said it, that how he's like trying to put microchips in people's brains, but then hates transgenderism? Like, just how direct of a contradiction that is. Like, man, I feel dumb for not thinking of that sooner. That's so good.
Yeah. The other one is that his underpopulation thing, where it's like clearly the population of the earth keeps growing. We're just growing in different spaces. It's Nigeria, China, and India are all overtaking the United States. We don't have an underpopulation problem. If anything, demographics state, and all sociologists agree, and anybody who studies this for a living or whatever, academically, will tell you that if anything, it's definitely an overpopulation problem predicated on our resource extraction and blah, 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 climate change, blah, blah, blah. So this idea that we're underpopulated, what he really means is white Western people, right? Because if he says, oh, but I don't want immigrants coming over the border, but we're underpopulated. We're underpopulated. He's a white supremacist masquerading as an industrialist yet again, just like our friend Henry Ford. So effectively what Eco established is that someone like Henry Ford, who embraced modern technologies while rejecting modernism, fell in line with the established trend in fascist thought. And therefore, an examination of anti-modernism in the Independent remains consistent with the analysis of the paper as a fascist propaganda outlet. One article that exemplified the Independent's reaction of modernism, quote, recalling pioneer days in Canada, appeared in April 3rd, 1920. This article centered around the pioneer story, which was told as true by the Frank Rattray, a hunter and guide of the Upper Ottawa region 30 years ago. It came to complete two cartoonish depictions of an event in Mr. Rattray's story. Although this article may have seemed relatively benign on its own, a slightly deeper reading would have revealed its inherent anti-modernist nature. What author Edward W. Thompson effectively accomplished was a glorification of a bygone era, celebrating a time of action, rugged individualism, and masculinity that fell into decline as cultural trends took hold. Predictably, recalling pioneer days in Canada was not the only article to be published in the Independent that glorified simpler times. In comparison to the modernity of the 1920s, as only a few months later in June 1920, the Independent began a series called The Salt of the Earth, described as a series of, quote, neighborhood stories of everyday Americans whose lives and work help to preserve American ideals. Very tribalistic sounding propaganda bullshit. While this trend of anti-modernism by way of reverence of times since past continued throughout the publication of the Independent. It was merely one of the elements of fascism promoted by the paper. Now, racism, the fifth facet of fascism laid out by Eco, was perhaps the most visible of all the 14 aspects seen in the Independent. So, and which is typical among what we know about fascists, right? It's interchangeable fascist, racist, sack of shit.
Yeah. I mean, I sent you the Poor Proles Almanac Substack article about the ties between white supremacy and homesteading, and I feel like this is a good place to plug that, because there are a lot of ties. And for another entire separate essay that I think is even longer than this, like it was very well researched. It was really well written. It's great to read, but like, you can tell from all the homesteading content, from all the off the grid or back to nature or whatever they want to mask it as. Like, as soon as you get deep enough in these communities, you see a lot of like white Christians in the comments saying really heinous shit, and it never fails, man. It never fucking fails. And it's like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there are ties between white supremacy and the ideas of homesteading as they exist in American popular culture today. It's like, it'd be one thing if there were a bunch of Americans who were saying, hey, look, we've realized that capitalism is not working for us, so we're going to, like, I don't know, try to adopt Native American ways as best as we can without culturally appropriating, like do it in like a, I don't know, an open-minded kind of way instead of just robbing culture the way white people tend to do. But there's like, that was never an option. It doesn't seem like that's even an option in people's minds to like give the land back to Native Americans and share it with them so that we stop doing destructive capitalism. It's like, I don't know. It's a real shame, man.
And you know what? The Native Americans taught us the Three Sisters system, which was you grow squash, corn, and beans all together. Like you plant these plants right next to each other. Instead of this monocrop that us so smart white people do, is that they actually planted these seeds next to each other. And what happens is the beans fix the nitrogen in the soil, feed the corn, and the squash feeds off some other thing. It's just it's a system that works perfectly. And when science went and appropriated the system and researched it, it found that it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's sustainable. It's smart. So yeah, we should.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because once again, to plug Poor Proles Almanac, like that's mostly what I know them for is their farming techniques. They have great episodes about like Korean farming methods and using wastewater or even mold to grow better crops that are healthier and more resistant to bacteria or whatever. So definitely check out that podcast. And yeah, I mean, especially if you're someone who's into farming or just veganism, anything that you guys are really big into.
We got all types out here. I guess this point of the show is like see what it's like to try to be a good person in life. I mean, because I'll talk to anybody, but I mostly want to talk about the problems that humanity creates for itself. And take humanity by the hair and just rub their nose in their own shit for an hour a week or so. Okay, so on the racist nature of fascism, Eco wrote, besides disagreement is a sign of diversity. Ur-Fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating a natural fear of difference. We all know that pretty well, I would say, right? The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Thus, Ur-Fascism is racist by definition. This, quote, first appeal, a burgeoning fascist movement, was exceptionally clear throughout Ford's 7-year ownership of the Independent. Racist propaganda was not merely present in the paper, but at times it was front-page news. With the pages of the Independent, most of the present form of bigotry was anti-Semitism. On numerous occasions, the paper boldly displayed headlines pertaining to supposed Jewish conspiracies. Indeed, during the year 1920, the Dearborn Independent advertised one or more anti-Semitic stories on the front page on at least a dozen occasions. Gee whiz. One article published during this time period of high-volume anti-Semitism bore the title, "The High and Low of Jewish Money Power." Wow.
Jesus.
This particular article was subtitled "A Brief Survey of Both Ends of Jewish Influence in Wall Street, from legitimate banking to large thefts of Liberty bonds." Oh, shit. And began implying that the Rothschild family, a prominent, wealthy European Jewish family, was an enemy of the United States. The article claimed that the family used its 20 million of the family's fortune to pay soldiers who fought against the colonies that became the United States. Wow, that's
crazy.
So crazy, dude. Furthermore, the paper describes that the Rothschilds' financial ties to the United States since the colonial era as an invasion of the money affairs of the country. Okay, well, whatever. The implied message of this and many other articles published in the Independent is quite clear. Radicalized minority groups, in this instance Jewish people, are not to be trusted. And this is early on. This is well before the Holocaust. I mean, anti-Semitism, they have had a horrible run. Like, I don't know what they did to piss off everybody all the time throughout history, but they really got
like every other group that has a lifestyle that is not conducive to capitalism. That's all you have to do. It's like, and it's so ironic, especially in the case of Jewish people, because, and I'd said this early on in my podcast when I learned about it myself, it's like thousands of years ago, they were viewed as these others, and they were viewed as like lesser than. So a bunch of Christians who already dominated society said, look, you're going to handle our money exchanging because we view that as dirty and we don't want to handle it. So we're going to give that to you. And then the Christians and white people proceeded to build up all of society in the entire world around money and capitalism, and then got mad when the people that they said to manage that had a bunch of it. And people who they already knew had like insular communities because they have like close-knit bonds, because they have like strong community ties built in with their religion. It's like when those people helped each other out, as you're supposed to do with your community, they got so mad at like nepotism existing in the Jewish community and like finance being part of like that Jewish community that they forced upon them. They literally foisted it upon the Jewish people. And then they got so mad after they built up the rest of the world around those values and got mad that the Jewish people are like excelling in those professional careers. It's like, go fuck yourselves.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me.
And the thing is, though, and this is for all you like nut bars out there, it is true that in the Jewish scripture, they have practiced this before, that they lend money to their fellow Jewish people without interest, and they charge people who aren't Jewish interest. And they did that before, and they probably do it to some degree today. But I'm not a fan of that. Like, I have to say, that's just another form of like banking discrimination.
Well, let's just go with Islamic banking. No interest for anybody. They make it work. Right. We can do it.
Is that true?
Yeah, you just can't make billions that way. That's why the West fights so hard against like anything that is Islamic, unless they can use it to oppress women or gay people. Like,
oh man,
I don't even know if it's Sharia banking, but just Islamic banking. Like, interest is forbidden in the Quran. So Islamic banks, they just don't charge interest, and you can do business without it. You just can't build up extreme amounts of wealth unless you can build fictitious capital by creating that legal fiction of interest to begin with.
Yeah. And you know what? Look at Qatar. Qatar is doing excellent. It has its resources. I'm sure it has its issues, but that's a civilized society with the lowest crime rate in the world. And it makes the United States look like fucking Afghanistan.
I mean, oil is always a wrench in the works. Like, once you factor that in, it throws a whole lot of things out of whack when you start talking about economic principles.
Oh, there's no ethics there. There's no ethics there. But the society itself, very highly civilized. So that I wouldn't be surprised. Look, there are in Saudi Arabia letting women drive. MBS is like, we got to ease everybody into this idea of liberation. But I think these type of weird things that you get, like oppressive, overly religious societies, they go away once you give people money. Child marriage. There's a correlation between child marriage and poor countries. It's not a religious thing. It's not a cultural thing. It's a poverty thing. If you're poor, you're more likely to have public executions and everything like this. And I mean, Saudi Arabia still does them, but you know, that's my working theory anyway.
I like it.
So where were we at?
I think furthermore, right? Oh no, that was the last sentence you read. Furthermore, the paper describes Rothschilds' financial ties to the United States since the colonial era as, quote, an invasion of the money affairs of the country, right?
Oh, yeah. I just lost. Oh, I scrolled up too high.
It's
oh,
right after 6. You can do Control F6 and you should find it.
Right above 6. Oh, this is making a good show. Furthermore, the paper describes Rothschild's financial ties to the United States, colonial era, money affairs of the country. Yeah, money is a weapon in some cases. The implied message of this and many of the articles published in the Independent is quite clear. Radicalized minority groups in the instance of Jewish people are not to be trusted. So America should not think of Jews as neighbors or even average people. Instead, they are enemies of the United States. The supposed attacks on Jews against the United States, according to the Independent, continued into the 1920s as police made arrests according to the fraud scheme that meant to profit off of World War I era Liberty bonds. Rather than being run-of-the-mill financial fraud scheme, as occasionally happens, the Independent described this incident as proving the existence of a vast Jewish conspiracy to loot Wall Street. The Dearborn Independent's presentation of Jews and other minorities branded these groups as enemies of others, an act that fell directly in line with the racist nature of fascism. Very true. Furthermore, this racism factored into multiple other features of fascism as described by Eco. An element of fascism that is both inherent to the ideology and entirely contradictory is how the enemy others of the fascists are treated. So, specifically with regards to how much of a threat they pose. So Eco writes that the followers of fascism must feel, quote, humiliated by the ostentatious wealth and force of their enemies. However, the followers must be convinced that they can overwhelm the enemies. Thus, a continuous shifting of rhetorical focus. The enemies are at the same time too strong and too weak. This contradictory view of the enemy is best illustrated in the May 22nd, 1920 issue of The Independent. The front page headline of that day's paper read, "The International Jew, the World's Problem."
Jesus.
It's a Jew flattening machine. This article spanned 2.5 pages and detailed how the Jewish people supposedly exerted a great degree of influence over the world's political and economic systems. Where economics were concerned, the article read, "The Jew is the only and original international capitalist, but as a rule, he prefers not to emblazon that fact upon the skies. He prefers to use Gentile banks and trust companies as his agents and instruments." The article went on to describe how Jewish people were in control of some of Europe's first stock exchanges and several of the continent's most important banks. In running these businesses, the newspaper claimed that the Jews were not only everywhere, but they were also in touch, supposedly organized across borders since before the days of conscious international commercial organizations. Moreover, the Independent said that these Jews were bound together by the sinews of common life, largely by way of supposed control of world financial systems. The Independent described how this economic power translated to a stronghold upon various governments. Effectively, this article made Jews out to be devious puppet masters who controlled the affairs of the world, embodying the idea that the enemy other is strong. However, the same article described Jewish people as poor in his masses, scattered abroad without country or government, and, quote, living under legal disabilities in almost every land. By describing the Jewish people as both masters of the world and financial and government affairs and poor masses without a country, the Dearborn Independent article perfectly encapsulated Eco's assertion that within fascist mythos, enemy others are simultaneously strong and weak. Oh man, that's heavy. That's heavy.
Because it's one of the classic criteria, yeah.
Well, this is what they're doing in Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have everything they need, and they're oppressing us and shooting rockets out, but they're also animals that aren't capable of doing anything right. Like it's a classic thing. We do it domestically to people we don't like, to blacks and migrants.
Yeah, I mean, think of how many groups you can apply this to. It's like the right says that trans people are weak and degenerate and mentally ill, but then also that they are invading every aspect of media and popular culture and taking over, right, with their trans agenda and their woke agenda. They say that about the left. They say that the left are all a bunch of weak soy boy sissies who can't do anything and are not familiar with guns. And if there ever was like a revolutionary scenario, we would all just lay down and die and accept our fate. But then they also say, once again, we are infiltrating every aspect of society, taking over all their schools and infiltrating their kids' brains, like to trans all their kids. It's like, this is what they think. They think we're both strong and weak all the time. And also like the same thing, even going back to a couple paragraphs ago, talking about Jewish influence in finance. It's like, it's literally the Shaq meme where I sleep when any other race does any kind of financial manipulation or uses any instrument of financialization to like steal a bunch of wealth from people or to like manipulate currencies. It's like only when George Soros does it do we notice that. Only then is it real shit. Like
You'll see it in like Instagram videos, like a black guy does some white collar crime and like embezzles money or something. And then in the comments, it's like, yeah, the usual suspects. See, usual suspects. Like, no, it's like never the suspect. They did the same thing with a trans shooter. It's like, oh, this one trans shooter finally went crazy and shot some people. See,
1 out of 1,000.
Dude, they put it on the front page of the Sun and the Inquirer and all these propaganda rags. All of Rupert Murdoch's rags. And by the way, folks, Rupert Murdoch owns, I probably said this before, National Geographic, Market Watch, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and the Sun, and probably the Mirror, and all these. Dude, media is not free. So
is he still alive?
Yeah, I mean, he's getting blood infusions from 13-year-old Filipino boys. Yeah. Send in the blood boy. Readers of The Independent should have felt two opposite emotions when they read this article at the moment. The Jews, predictably, should have been viewed as a great threat not only to the United States as a country, but also to the individual reader. The international Jewish conspiracy that The Independent constantly warned was working to exploit and undermine the United States, by extension, meant the reader's way of life was under attack. In spite of this onslaught against America by the Jews of the world, the reader was meant to take solace in the contradictory fact that the Jews were weak. Even though they're taking over, even if the American way of life was at risk, the reader should have found comfort in how poor and scattered the Jewish population was, as these factors meant the Jewish enemy other could be defeated. But create an enemy and then create the idea that he can be easily defeated. Make you hate him, then go after him, right?
Does this also sound like the secret cabal that controls all of our institutions and three-letter agencies and the whole deep state, but also we're going to beat them with our QAnon movement that is mostly memes online? It's like...
yeah. And misinformation peddled directly to us out of the box from those agencies. Like, I just got an advertisement on Rumble because we're on Rumble too. Check us out on Rumble. And it comes, and I open the email, and there's an advertisement below, and it's fucking ivermectin. And I go, what the fuck is wrong with people? This is a parasite drug for fucking horses or whatever.
I was just about to say, like, we're going to beat the cabal with hydrochloroquine, like, because people forgot about that one. Yeah.
It never ceases to amaze me how far gone the boomers of America really are. I just don't have any words for that. That's for another time. Yeah. Hurry up and die, please.
Bye-bye.
So reading on, the sixth aspect of fascism, as described by Eco, an appeal to the middle class, is an appeal to the middle class. So they go after the people who run everything, basically, or like the widest, most broadest demographic. This fascist
terms, they were going after the professional managerial class. Sorry. Because there's no such thing as a middle class, but you want to go after the professional managerial class, the people who are not doing manual labor, but feel like they have a lot to lose if there's any kind of cultural shift, especially if that involves something like land reform or property reform or anything like that.
Yeah, and allows them to crack the whip harder on the actual workers who they're not worth educating on anything, apparently. So this fascist characteristic is unsurprisingly also found in the Dearborn Independent. So a January 1920 issue of the Independent contains an article about Romania, as referred to as Rumania by the author. This article bears the title, The Country Without a Middle Class, which may have well been quite an eye-catching for an American audience. The author, H.D. Visson, describes the state of the country of Romania and the contrast between rich and poor observed within its borders. The first to be described of the upper class of Romania was whom D. Wisson wrote, "In the streets of Bucharest, the capital city, over-jeweled and overdressed women, slumberous-eyed, heavy-lipped, painted, languidly lolling back in smartly appointed carriages, driving up and down in the twilight hour, and foreign shopkeepers who have waxed fat on the money showered upon them, smirk and bow. Not bad. They talked so pretty back then, I'm telling you. In contrast to the wealthy, the average Romanian peasant is described as a very docile person. The article said the peasant is a Gentile, or I'm sorry, is a gentle, like his songs and his dances. Strangely, I feel like the guy in the bottom of the Titanic, like all the rich people on top, and I'm in the bottom having the time of my life dancing and singing. Strangely enough, one finds that of the Balkan fire in him, almost effeminate in dress and in manner. The men running to white linen trousers and shirts worn on the outside and delicately embroidered with the pretty floral designs, ever crooning soft songs and looking... This sounds like me. Damn it, with my pretty suits and my good looks.
I'm like, Romania sounds awesome.
Yeah. Ever crooning soft songs and looking out at the world with dreamy eyes, the peasant seems not to possess the virility that rumbles up demanding better things. Jesus Christ. This article provides ample insight into the independence appeal to the middle class. The description of Romania's wealthy elite gave the impression that those upper class were, in a sense, aloof. The rich were out of touch with reality, quite literally separated from the world around them by the walls of their smartly appointed carriages. On the other hand, the poor were described as docile and weak-willed. The men were said to be effeminate, lacking in the vigor that drove men to improve their standings in life. This country without a middle class, and by extension the upper and lower classes, are of course meant to stand in contrast with the middle class of the United States. Drawing lines in the sand, again, divisive nature. Look at the poor people. Look at the rich people. You're not them. They're both bad. You're the hero. I mean, right?
I just would have loved to have heard like the Romanian description of the American elites and then their description of the working classes in the US. And then also contrast that with how would you describe like working class poor people in the US today? Other than like, you wouldn't say that they were like wearing delicately pretty floral suits and singing a bunch of ever crooning soft songs and that they were a bunch of chill, docile people. You would say they're a bunch of pig-headed people who are ready to fight all the time, who are probably on 3 or 4 substances at any given moment, and who are like severely in debt and miserable at the world. It's like all of this sounds good in comparison to how we are now.
That's totally true. I was going to say the same thing, that the tact has gone out of it. Like, people today are really fast to say, I hate all these people. They're degenerates and we need to eradicate them. That's how bad it is. Like, poor people need to be eradicated. I mean, rich people should be eradicated as well, but whatever. That's another story. If the wealthy elites were out of touch with the world around them, the people in the middle class must have been connected with the world around them. Similarly, when the men of the lower class were docile, effeminate, and weak-willed, the men of the middle class were therefore masculine and strong, the undeniable masters of their own destinies. It was the contrast between the middle class and those economically above and below that made this article a fascistic appeal to the middle class, as those in the economic middle were implied to be inherently superior to others, thus cementing the appeal to the middle class in the fourth and 5 easily identifiable elements of fascism found in the Dearborn Independent. So yeah, the thing is, divisiveness on all levels is the way to start a fascist, whatever, revolution, right? Be divisive, find an enemy, define him vaguely, and attack him with every breath. And at some point, it spreads like wildfire. People love reactionary politics, and especially this one where you make the way the patriotism does inflames people's egos about and pride about their happenstance of birth, where they just happen to be born in this country. Pride goeth before the fall. Pride being like not the greatest thing for idiots to have. Like, if you're an idiot, and yet the idiots are the first ones to get up on that high horse and say, I'm proud. I'm proud to be this and I'm proud to be that.
I mean, Chris, this is like why I keep commenting on every reel, just that conservative views are linked to lower cognitive ability, because how is it that people always turn to fascism? It's like, it's so easy when people are feeling exploited, when they're feeling alienated for actual class-based reasons, to substitute the conspiracy theory that sounds like something they already just kind of believe. something kind of racist, something anti-Semitic, something that points at the scary others rather than the actual elites who may look like them and are exploiting them. It's like it's always so easy, especially again in a country that was founded on far right principles to begin with.
Yeah. So if you get shit on at work and your boss takes a huge shit on your face and you hate it, you can't really yell at your boss. So what do? You go home and you torture somebody else, some poor kid along the way that you meet on the way home, because it's so easy for these people to
they
say,
go yell at black people online.
Yeah. I'm going to go yell at helpless minorities instead of actually addressing the billionaires who have taken all the wealth. And sometimes you can squeeze out of conservatives this idea that, private equity firms and globalization. It's like, yeah, you're almost there. Keep going. And then they're like, but black people too. I'm like, no.
That's goddamn it.
But they're running out of the sunglass hut with all the sunglasses. And I'm mad. I'm like, dude, it's the least they're insured. It's going to be fine.
Does not matter.
So the Independent, the Dearborn Independent may have embodied most, if not all, of Eco's 14 points of fascism at various moments throughout its run. But the 5 elements of fascism stand out as particularly visible in comparison to others. The 5th clear aspect of fascism found in the Independent after anti-modernism, racism, appeals to the middle class, and the characterization of enemy others as simultaneously strong and weak was an obsession with a plot. In Ur-Fascism, what do I keep calling him? Eco, Italian dude. That to people who feel deprived of a clear social identity, okay, Ur-Fascism says that there's only privilege is the most common one, to be born in the same country. This is the origin of nationalism. Besides, the ones who can provide an identity to a nation are its enemies. Thus, at the root of the Ur-Fascist psychology, there is the obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers must feel besieged. The easiest way to solve the plot is to appeal to xenophobia, as we were just talking about. But the plot must also come from the inside. Jews are usually best target because they have the advantage of being all the same time inside and outside. Right. They're weak and strong. In the U.S., a prominent instance of the plot obsession is found in Pat Robertson's The New World Order. But as if we have recently seen, there are others. It comes to little surprise that the biggest plot in the Independent was obsessed with the Jewish plot for control of all aspects of society, as Jews were noted by Eco as being particularly easy target for this form of propaganda, and the Independent was well established as an anti-Semitic publication. The Independent constantly harped about Jewish efforts on controlling various aspects of global society. What exactly the Jews were conspiring to do varied between issues, but the Jewish people were constantly said to have been organizing against the United States. According to the Independent, there was a Jewish dictatorship. I lost my spot.
There was a Jewish dictatorship of the United States during World War I, apparently, according to these guys. It's right before footnote 17.
Here we go. The Independent constantly harped on about Jewish efforts to control varying aspects of the global society. What they were conspiring to do varied between issues, but the Jewish people said we're always organizing. So, according to the Independent, there was Jewish dictatorship in the United States during World War I, and the Jews continued to maintain their alleged power through the 1920s. Now, additionally, the Independent asserted that Jews had plans to manipulate international economies and control the world's newspapers and promote Bolshevism, which is not true at all. The 5 articles are, so which one is it? Are they promoting Bolshevism or are they trying to control all the economies? Because it seems like, I don't know. Seems weird.
Don't you know that communists want to distribute the wealth among everyone, but also hoard it for themselves? It makes perfect sense, Chris.
This is the fascist thing. They want to do both. These 5 articles are merely a selection of the overwhelming amount of pieces put out by the Independent, which claimed that the Jews were involved in anti-American conspiracies. To say that the Dearborn Independent had an obsession with the Jewish plots was quite an understatement, as the mountain of anti-Semitic articles left by the publication show, and this obsession further cemented the fascist nature of the Independent. So ultimately, the evidence at hand proves that the Dearborn Independent, while operated by Henry Ford between 1919 and 1927, functioned largely as a major fascist propaganda outlet. The often lauded businessman capitalized on the wave of reaction that rose in response to the new modernist culture of the 1920s to spread far-right political viewpoints across the United States. Although the 1920s are often viewed with a rather glamorous decade of jazz music, and it was, well-dressed flappers, beautiful ladies, and cultural upheaval, a rather unsavory underbelly lies just below the surface. And that's true. Henry Ford was just one man among many who successfully seized the opportunity to create the emerging modern world to cater to those who opposed the changes sweeping across the United States and the world. And again, you're Elon Musk of the same day. The parallels are not to be ignored.
It's like 1-to-1. It's like so dead on. That's probably like the overarching point of this episode. I also just think it's funny in that last paragraph. It's like the way that they will point to any Jewish person, and they will still do this today. It's like they could say that there was a Jewish dictatorship over the United States during World War I. It's like, did we have a Jewish president? Did we have Jewish politicians in any like the high level positions in the United States government? Of course not. Maybe there were like some aides somewhere in like the workings, like some pages or somewhere in the offices, but like that is literally like, I'll make an analogy here. This would be my closing point. The first card trick I ever learned, it's the dumbest thing. I learned this when I was about 7 years old. You take a deck of cards and you look at the bottom card and you put the deck of cards in your pocket. And then you ask the person, the victim, I guess, if they want to do a card trick. And then you just get them to narrow down that card. Like if it's the 9 of diamonds or something, you ask them to name the 4 suits and then you ask them to pick 2. And if they pick the wrong ones, you ask them what are the other 2 remaining. And you keep doing this. You just ask them to either pick suits or cards, or you divide the card numbers in half. And then when they pick the ones that you don't want, you say, well, what's the other one that's left? And then you get them to narrow down to that card. And then you ask them, okay, I'm going to pull that card out of my pocket. In what order would you like me to pull it out? First, second, 15th, 52nd? And they can pick any number because you know it's on the bottom. You're going to pull it out with your thumb as opposed to your front fingers. It's like, it's the dumbest card trick, but it works if like your audience is easily impressed. But that's also how these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories work. It's like, we will just look anywhere in the network until we can find a Jewish person. And it doesn't matter if there's like all white people at the top of this organization making all the money. We're just going to theorize we're going to hypothesize and claim without any proof whatsoever that whoever is Jewish is secretly controlling the levers. And it makes no sense, but it doesn't have to, because it's not based on facts. It's not based on objective observing reality. So
yeah, for some reason, it just sounds good. And the xenophobia that's inherent in everybody, to activate it is quite easily, especially for working class people or whatever, people who don't want to see their standard of living decline. And so everything that sounds the least bit threatening to their culture or their livelihood, they just go, no, I can't have any of that. And whoever it is. And then if you talk even further and tell them in great detail that these people are your enemy for XYZ. Oh, it's like a domino effect. All of a sudden you've got this person ready to physically hurt another person.
Yeah. All they have to do is feel like a victim. They don't even necessarily have to be.
Fucking sad, honestly. We deal with it every day. We have to see people in comment sections who, some of them are being funny, but some of them truly believe in what they're saying. And it's frightening. I don't know. It is terribly frightening. So before we go, I wanted to read out a little bit of this article that talks still about Henry Ford. And this was something I came across as you told me to research Henry Ford. I dug a little deeper and I found that he also had some pretty other bizarre problems with his brain. He had... So everybody's, like you said, there's, what'd you call it? Taylorism, right? Everybody sits on the assembly line and does this work together. You put the head on the doll. The next person puts the clothes on the doll. The next person puts the doll in the package. Boom, assembly line working. So he kind of rolled with that and everything, but he started to get a little crazy with trying to control people's lives. And so I wrote this article, How Henry Ford's Strange Social Program Aimed to Control the Personal Lives of Workers. So he had this department called the Ford Sociological Department, and they would really check up on workers when they were at home, off the clock, you know.
Yikes.
So I'm going to get into a little bit of it. Have you heard anything about this?
No.
So again, our our old-timey Elon Musk style racist weirdo nut job industrialist. In March 1913, Henry Ford established the Ford Sociological Department, a division within the Ford Motor Company designed to oversee social benefits for employees and monitor their personal lives. While ostensibly created to improve the welfare of the Ford's workforce, the department practices revealed a darker side of Ford's capitalist vision, characterized by an invasive surveillance, paternalistic control, and forced assimilation. The department was tasked with ensuring that employees lived in well-maintained single-family homes and adhered to specific behavioral standards to qualify for the full $5 per day wage. Whopping. This wage was revolutionary at the time, doubling the average pay for industrial workers. Okay, damn, I can believe that. That sucks. It was a while ago. Yeah. Sounds like you could get a steak and kidney pie and ride the trolley right? And
still have money left over to see the 2-bit movies or whatever the fuck they would call them.
Yeah. Go see the Nickelodeon. However, the conditions attached to this wage were stringent and intrusive. Investigators, later known as, quote, advisors, monitored employees both at work and at home, offering hygiene instructions, financial and legal advice, and even dictating how employees should spend their money. The department's team investigators grew from 500 to 200, conducting unannounced home visits to check cleanliness and living conditions. It sounds like fucking North Korea. They inquired about employees' spending habits, alcohol consumption, and marital relationships, effectively prying into the every aspect of their personal lives. So this level of scrutiny was not just about ensuring their employees did not squander their wages, but also as a means of enforcing Ford's moral and social standards. Now, come on, all you capitalist fans who are also like anti-authority, all you ANCAP people, come on. This is where capitalism leads to. It doesn't lead to libertarianism. It leads to enslavement.
They never mentioned this, and it's such a recent example. It's so weird. And such an idolized capitalist that people still love today. It's so weird that this never comes up.
He was a businessman and an entrepreneur, and he revolutionized this and that. Yeah, he sure did. A significant part of the department's mission was to, quote, Americanize the largely immigrant workforce. The Ford English School was established to teach English to non-English speaking workers and promote patriotism and assimilation. So, very nice. The school conducted a melting pot ceremony where immigrant graduates symbolically transformed into Americans, a process that underscored Ford's disregard for cultural diversity. Yeah, the turban, you can't wear that here. You have to wear a cowboy hat and chew gum from now on. Howdy, y'all.
I'm sure it wasn't that nicely suggested either.
Right. Or we could fire you and you could go live in poverty.
Or we could just beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
You dirty so-and-so. Like, just pick your slur. I'm sure they would have them.
Yeah, which they did in those days. The rules and conditions set by the Sociological Department extended to various aspects of the employees' lives. For instance, employees needed company permission to buy cars, and women were excluded from eligibility for full wage unless they were single with children to support. They were against the gender wage gap. They were all about making the gap wider. So there's employee testimonies from the time. One Ford worker recalled during a period, he said, you have to have the curtains open by 9 o'clock in the morning or you'd get a call from the Sociological Department. Love it. The testimony reveals the extent the company monitored and even the most mundane aspects of workers' daily routines. Another employee remembered saying, we had to keep the house clean, the yard clean, the children must go to school, and the investigators would come and check up on everything. Yeah, this is
literally communism. This is literally some other country that we don't like, not America.
Right. And it is America, though. That's the thing, guys. And it can happen anywhere. So when they love to waggle their finger at North Korea, and yeah, you got to have a portrait of Kim Jong-un in every house in North Korea. Nobody's exempt from this kind of this behavior. So I don't want to hear anything.
Get a portrait of Kim Jong-un just for the hell of it.
We all should. We really should. I mean, he's a handsome guy. Another employee remembered, they taught us how to read and write, but they also taught us how to use knives, forks, and napkins, how to wash, how to shave, how to dress, including how to wear a tie. This was testimony from an immigrant worker who went to the Ford English School and was forced to culturally assimilate. The invasive nature of the investigations further illustrated by one of the workers' account. They said, they'd come into your house and see if you had liquor. They'd check your bank account to see if you were saving money. Now, this level of scrutiny into personal finances and lifestyle choices demonstrates a company's attempt to control not just how the employees worked, but how they lived and spent their earnings. Pretty sick shit, man. I don't know. What do you think?
It's so crazy because, like, whenever you hear of Henry Ford, what is the most common factoid you hear about him? Is that he made the price of his cars low enough that his workers on the assembly line could buy them, right? That's literally what they always say about him. And you don't hear about this level of, like, dictatorial, like, tyrannical, like, literally, what is the word that they always use? It's like arcane. Just like, this is, like, ridiculous. It's archaic. It's terrible. It's medieval level control.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about why somebody would go out for this. But then, like, in times of economic downturn, fascism and that level of authoritarian control becomes really highly appealing to people because they feel like everybody's got, we all got to just be really good and work really, really hard, and then no complaining. And that's the exact time that poor people start complaining, where they go, hey, we're starving over here. And they say, no starving. No, la. You're fine. And anybody who speaks out, send them to jail, execute them, whatever. Then they're enemies of the state. And then, of course, like you said, it's exacerbated by the propaganda that they feed them. You know, those poor people complaining about how they're starving. Guess what? They want to rape your fucking wife, and take your kids.
I mean, this is the flip side of, like, when people do something for an economic benefit, whether it's buying a home in an HOA community because maybe it's a little cheaper, or sometimes even spending more money to buy a home in an HOA community that has all kinds of crazy rules that are invasive on your personal life and literally your home. And people will still put up with it because it gives them that exclusivity, that feeling of, like, lording something over other people, just like they will tolerate, like, the amount of people who put on fake smiles and have substance abuse problems because they have saddled themselves with a career and a lifestyle that is alien to them. And they have to do so many things, like go to a church they don't believe in to keep up appearances, to have the right community and the right networking. They have to, like, play a sport they don't actually care about, or, like, go to parties with, like, parents of their kids so that they can network properly. It's like the people who are chasing money and who are sacrificing their personal life and their ethics and whatever else, that comes with a cost of your humanity, and that's reflected in some way, whether it's like neuroses or some kind of, like, again, substance abuse thing that you're going to substitute for that feeling of, like, genuine care about your job and your career. It's like, that's not lost on me. And so when I see, like, why these people would put up with this level of invasiveness just for getting, like, double the wage of, like, the people around them, it's like, yeah, I can sort of see why. If you offered people $100,000 or $200,000 gig right now, but they had to put up with, like, Big Brother level invasiveness on their life, I think a lot of people would take that, unfortunately. Like,
bro, if I could just tell you the things I've done for money, holy shit! You get a desperate man that needs to make a quick buck. I've done some shit. I'm still waiting for the statute of limitations to run out so I can actually even talk about them. So here's my critical analysis. The modern corporation, the bastion of benevolent oversight and paternalistic concern for its loyal drones. Only one can imagine the delight of Henry Ford would take in seeing as how today's tech titans and retail overlords has actually elevated his quaint and sociological experiments to dizzying new heights of worker surveillance and lifestyle management. Take Apple. Okay, the purveyor of sleek gadgetry and walled gardens. Why stop at monitoring employees' screen time when you could mandate company-issued iPhones that track their every movement, calorie intake, bowel movement? An Apple employee a day keeps the doctor away, and free will too. Amazon, not content with merely timing warehouse workers' bathroom breaks, but could expand into a panopticon of employees' homes. Alexa-enabled smart homes would ensure that workers maintain prime-level efficiency even off the clock. Alexa, remind John to do 50 squats before his 2-minute allotted shower. Uber, another one. Ever the innovator in the precarious employment, might a pioneer of ratings for life system. Drivers' every interaction, from family dinners to dental appointments, would be subject to 5-star review. Anything less than 4.8 stars, and it's back to remedial smile training. Tesla, the whopper of them all, channeling its founder, a penchant for grandiose schemes, Elon Musk. He could establish worker colonies on Mars. They are free from the Earth's pesky labor laws. Employees would toil 25 hours a day to build the electric vehicles of tomorrow. You can sleep when you're dead or when you've met your quota, whichever comes first.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's very
So
good.
that being said, what do you anything you want to add before we go? We'll probably come back, do another episode tomorrow.
No, I mean, I just again think it's funny how it's like the Michael Jordan meme, the selective outrage of these people. It's not, the actual business plot, which is when a bunch of wealthy titans of industry tried to literally coup the United States government in a fascist coup because they didn't like the way that I can't remember who was president at the time, but he wasn't fascist enough for them. He wasn't cutting. I think it was FDR, and like the New Deal prompted them to like hit up Smedley Butler, who was like he was like the General Petraeus of the time. And so they said to him, like, look, let's do this fascist coup of the government so that we can get real freedom back. And he was like, actually, no, I'm going to rat you guys out. And then still nothing happened to them. But like, I just love how that's not the plot. It's some secret Jewish plot that they can't actually detail or point to in any way with evidence. And it's also not the rampant structure of capitalism that forces people into the Black Mirror dystopia that you were just describing, or forces people to accept jobs like working in Henry Ford's community camp where you have to be subjected to this level of invasiveness. It's not that structure of capitalism that makes you accept that. It's, again, the secret Jewish plot that we can't identify and is bred only in the minds of these people who are weak and already a subculture and outgroup among us. It's like none of it makes sense, but it never really has to.
That's why it's up to guys like me and you to sensationalize actual history and make it juicy enough that they'll actually bite onto it rather than weird, especially the archaic Jewish conspiracy theory that's even outdated by today's standards. Like, you have these guys rooting for Israel now, and it's mostly anti-Muslim shit now. Is the main thing. So whatever. But we have a lot of battles to wage against people on that spectrum of attitudes and intelligence levels. And all we can do is try to tell people, like, look, you're under siege from fucking rich people. That's who's you're under siege from. So
of all backgrounds,
you got black billionaires, you got Jewish billionaires, you got Christian billionaires, you got women billionaires, and they might seem real woke and with it and progressive and liberal and all that stuff, but in reality, their entire existence is the problem.
the worst ones are the French ones. I don't know. I'm just fucking.
Yeah, the French billionaires. There's two things I hate: racist people and the French. Yeah.
All right, man. You want to wrap it up?
We'll wrap it up. We'll talk afterwards. Everybody, be good and go communist and go vegan and be nice and